Well, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to today's Women Plus Water conversation. And we'll be talking today about water and gender. I'm joining you today from Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. This land is the traditional territory of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis people who have cared for these lands and waters for generations. As a settler of this area, I do recognize my responsibility to learn, listen, and help steward the water for future generations. I invite those of you joining from other territories today to reflect on and recognize the lands and waters that you call home and set an intention to have a productive and positive conversation today. So I'm Stacy Demansky. I'm an outreach and engagement officer with the Global Institute for Water Security here at the University of Saskatchewan, and I'll be your host for Women Plus Water. For those of you who are new to joining us, welcome. Women Plus Water is an inclusive international community of people who are connected to water, and we come together to explore the gender dimensions of water research, management, and decision making. So if you want to learn more about us, please visit womenpluswater.org. The link will probably be in the chat. Before we get into today's event, I'm going to go through a few logistics for you. It's about a 1 hour long event and will be interpreted live into French. So you can access that French channel by using the globe in the bottom toolbar. We are recording this event and we will be sharing it after on YouTube and our website in both English and French. There will be an opportunity today to ask questions to the guests at the end of the event. So please use that Q&A function to submit your questions. And lastly, we invite all of the students and early career individuals attending today's conversation to stay on after to have an open discussion with today's guests. We're very appreciative for these guests for volunteering their time to do this. So thank you all for offering that extra bit of time. Today's conversation is in recognition of World Water Day, which occurs annually on March 22nd, and it's to celebrate water and inspire action to tackle the global water crisis. This year's theme is Water and Gender, with a campaign slogan being Where Water Flows, Equality Grows. This theme highlights that safe water and sanitation are fundamental human rights and essential to achieving both the Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is water and sanitation, and SDG 5, gender equality. The global water crisis affects everyone, but not equally. Women and girls often bear the brunt of water scarcity, and they experience reduced opportunities for education and economic participation. The 2026 campaign calls for a transformative and rights-based approach where women's leadership, voices, and agency are fully recognized within the water decision making. Just today, the UN World Water Development Report 2026 was launched, and it is titled Water for All People, Equal Rights and Opportunities. The report provides data and solutions to advance gender equity in the water sector. And so for those of you who want to read the report, a link will be in the chat. This report and the theme of World Water Day 2026 aligns closely with what we emphasize here at Women Plus Water. When women have equal voice and leadership in water solutions, communities become safer, healthier, and more resilient. Similar to the World Water Development Report being about all people, the Plus in Women Plus Water is about moving beyond women to encompass all equity deserving groups and their intersectional identities. The pillars that underpin Women Plus Water is to highlight the knowledge and expertise of women and equity deserving groups in water and shed light on the gendered and equity or inequity dimensions of water. And today, our guests embody just that. So I'm going to move into our program for today, and I'm excited to be joined by Andrea Rowe, Indrakshi Tandon, and Catherine Farr. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but if you want to view their full biographies on our website, a link will be in the chat. So I'll first welcome our host for today for the conversation, which is Andrea Rowe, who is no stranger to Women Plus Water, and you may have seen her in previous years of being the host for Women Plus Water. So Andrea, I'll let you take the conversation from here and introduce yourself and the guests.
Thank you so much, Stacey, for the kind introduction. And thank you to Stacey and Corin and Viviana for having me back on Women Plus Water. As Stacey mentioned, I was the host of Women Plus Water for a number of years, and it's just a pleasure to be back here in the community today and to have this wonderful conversation with Indrakshi Tandon and Catherine Farr. In my current role, I'm the Director of Operations in the Office of Institutional Commitments at the University of Calgary, which is an office that combines equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility with sustainability and mental health and well-being. I'm also the founder of a company called Reflect Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, where I work providing coaching to EDI leaders and strategic advice. Prior to joining the University of Calgary, I was the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Specialist for the Global Institute for Water Security and Global Water Futures at the University of Saskatchewan. And that was how I came to work with Corin and to really understand, the power of water as a force for equality in the world. I am a political scientist by training, and my work has focused on gender and innovation in Canada, Sweden, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And I previously, prior to joining the Institute, had worked in the tech sector primarily with a company called Feminuity that I co-founded. And so it's been a real pleasure to learn about water, to work with outstanding colleagues in Canada and around the world. And I look forward to bringing a gender lens to current issues in water today with Catherine and Indrakshi. I believe that Viviana may have a slide to share behind me here, which is that at the Office of Institutional Commitments at the University of Calgary, our office is also home to the Sustainable Development Solutions Network for Canada, SDSN Canada. And we are hosting what has now become an annual conference on May 19th and 20th, which is Canada's leading conference on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a fantastic opportunity for anyone in Canada, but also internationally, to join together with other folks interested in exploring the theme from local action to global impact. And I know this may be of interest to many of you here. The early bird registration is still open, and it is possible to attend online or in person with opportunities for Indigenous land-based learning and excursions. And so I think I wanted to take the opportunity to mention that today so that folks can join in and continue this type of conversation in a milieu that's going to expand beyond water. And I've also provided some free downloads that I developed together with Corin at the Institute on my website, reflectedi.com, which are related to protocols with inclusive events, inclusive field work, and inclusive research practices, along with an academic article that was published at the Institute around implementing equity, diversity, and inclusion in a large-scale research network. And all of these resources are free and open source and might be applicable for those of you that are contemplating the same kinds of questions that we are going to discuss today. And so with that, I'd like to pass it over to Indrakshi Tandon to introduce herself.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Stacey and Viviana, for all the work that you've done behind the scenes, bringing this together, and Corinne, who introduced me to this wonderful group. And I'm thrilled, Andrea and Catherine, to be part of this conversation with you. So just a little bit about me. My name is Indrakshi Tandon. I'll give you a little bit of educational background because I am in academia. So that's where all of my work lies. I've got my master's from Delhi University in anthropology before moving to the State University of New York at Albany to do my PhD, again in cultural anthropology. While I was doing my PhD, I moved to Dubai and was working as an adjunct professor at Zayed University. And after I finished, I was hired at American University in Dubai, where I still am as an assistant professor of anthropology. Now, I am an anthropologist by training, but I find myself increasingly engaging across disciplines and industries. In research, I have collaborated with rural communities, development academics and practitioners, geographers and climate scientists, I teach in an interdisciplinary program at AUD in the International and Middle Eastern Studies Department. And I'd say that while most of my work is theoretically and methodologically grounded in anthropology, it's very much informed by normative ideas related to equity and rights, specifically for women and other marginalized communities. So, with regards to women and water, my research has explored a lot about how doing gender in development speak has become mainstreamed in water-related development policies and programs with ultimately harmful impacts to women. Gender mainstreaming has taken what should have been a project of empowerment and hollowed it by solely targeting women and pushing for mandatory inclusion and participation of women without any external support that recognizes women's already burdened daily lives. More recently, I've pivoted away a bit from women and water, and I'm doing a little bit research on climate and water adaptations in the context of the United Nations SDGs. It's very clear that we are going to blow past the targeted date for achieving these SDGs, in part due to siloed approaches to achieving various SDGs, the competing interests and priorities of states and industries, and the sheer number of natural disasters and conflicts that have taken place in the past decade, which are pushing any achievements backwards. I myself today find myself slightly displaced thanks to the current conflict. I'm privileged to have been able to leave, and I'm in India at the moment with my family. But certainly, these conflicts are impacting women and their access to water. I'm thinking constantly about the women in Sudan, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran, who are not being able to do what they need to do to survive, to get water, to feed their families. So this talk is very, very precious, I would say. Um, in all of this research that I've done, the thread that connects all my work together are the people that I work with, my collaborators, the communities I work with. I've been doing fieldwork in India since 2006 when I first traveled to a very small district in central India to work with the Bihu tribal community. And since then, I have visited on and off for my doctoral dissertation. And more recently, in 2024, I was in South India to collect data from tribal communities on a climate change project that I'm working on that I may have time later to talk about. And it is their voices that are the highlights of what I do and why I do it. And doing fieldwork is something that I find great joy in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And actually, we're really looking forward to learning more about your work. And now I'll pass it over to Catherine Farr from the Community of Women in Water to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you, Stacey, Vivian, Karen. It's all the work that you've done to make this event possible. I'm really excited to be here. I've been following Women Plus Water for a long time, and I'm just very honored to be asked to be a speaker today. So a bit about me, I've been working on science policy and implementation, mostly at the global level since 2011, with a slight shift to specifically water-related issues since 2015. I know that the bios are in the chat, so I'll skip some of that. But I will just say I've worked on a range of water issues from climate change and water resources to WASH and gender, finance and governance, urban resilience. So it's probably not a surprise that from early on I was really interested in transdisciplinary work. So I double majored as an undergraduate in chemistry and international relations, and then went on to get a master's in analytical chemistry because I knew for a long time that I wanted to do science policy. But I didn't know what that would look like or where it would lead me. And part of where it has led me is forming the Community of Women in Water, first as a network in 2019, and then as a UK charity in 2025. So the Community of Women in Water aims to create opportunities for women to share knowledge, offer support, and build networks to raise awareness and educate both about gender equality and water resources and wash systems, to challenge damaging stereotypes that perpetuate gender inequality, and to promote equality and diversity. We connect over 1,500 women from around the globe to help them share insights and ideas. we have lots of virtual events that we've done. We've done some in-person events as well. On this slide, you can see a little bit about the challenges in the sector, but those have already been covered. So I'll just say here, you can learn more about us by clicking on the QR code or going to cwiw.org/connect, and you can see our link to our LinkedIn company page. But I do have some sort of quotes from some of our members about why they find the community helpful for them. And it really is an important support network. It helps them think about water in a de-siloed way, because we do try to link all of the different types of water, reaching out to women across ages, disciplines, and geographies. So really value that. And then on the next slide, I'd just like to shout out to our amazing volunteers. We could not run the community without them. They're from all over the world, all different kinds of disciplinary backgrounds, current jobs, doing all sorts of different and amazing and wonderful things in water. So really grateful to all of them for everything they do to make the community possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Corinne. That's a great introduction as well. And we have met each other before, and we've decided what we'd like to talk about today. And so we wanted to begin this conversation with some really big picture thinking, and connected to the current state of the world and water and give a global perspective. We're seeing big changes in international development, including funding cuts, reorganizations, and in some places, less focus on equity. How would you describe what's happening now in global development? Do you think it's a short-term setback or the start of a new global reality? I think I'll pass this to Indrakshi first to give us your hands-on perspective, and then Catherine.
Thank you, Andrea. So definitely a multipolar world is taking shape. That's the opinion of most experts and analysts today. And the development world has to follow suit. We are aware of, those of us who work in development, we are aware of what happened when the US withdrew aid support to so many parts of the world. It was the biggest donor of ODA across the world. And once it withdrew its funding, we have countless overwhelming evidence of women who have lost access to healthcare and education and very key benefits to them. But is that the end of the development world as we know it? No, Germany has stepped up since then. I believe it was last year that the Chancellor of Germany and the finance minister talked about multilateralism is the answer to global challenges. They are now the largest contributor of ODA across the world. There have been regional development banks that have stepped in, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank. The BRICS new development bank is now going to start taking a more significant role. Last year, when the Mandalay earthquake happened in 2025 in Myanmar, China stepped up with a lot of assistance. So we are certainly seeing the vacuum that the US has created being filled from regional actors. And what is different and maybe even significant is that these multilateral organizations are mostly from the global south. And there are a lot of opportunities here to effect real change. So I really do hope that this is not a short-term setback, but a push to really reinvent how we think about development and how we do development in maybe two ways that I can think of that I can talk about right now. The first is the beginning of a more effective development that cuts out some of the development bloat, I would say, that has kind of plagued the development world in the past 50, 60 years. Inflated salaries, stale ideas that are rooted in colonialism about what development is, what it should mean, over-reliance on top-down strategies, a whole aid industry that just relies on a continued need for dependence, where you create programs that are not sustainable, and you need to maintain this cycle of development because you have so many careers that are dependent on development, so many people that are dependent on development, and and if you really go deep into how many programs work, it's a cycle of dependency. Rather than creating sustainable development, we are creating dependencies. So this is one way, one of the things that I feel like the way forward could fix. The other thing that I would like to talk about is recognizing, and this might happen, recognizing that development is political. Most of the systems that the world operates on, capitalism, neoliberalism, patriarchy, these are extractive systems that survive on the exploitation of marginalized populations. These are political systems. They're not just socioeconomic systems. They are very much rooted in politics. And scholars have been saying for years that development cannot be treated as apolitical. And for years, we have seen technical solutions to what are very clearly political problems. So there is space here with the reinvention of the development world to recognize that if you want to effect real change, we need to see development as not apolitical, not just technical solutions of building dams, building wells, um, uh, creating watershed programs, but to actually be able to give women the power to make decisions, to access these wells, to go out beyond the patriarchy that defines their lives. So there is room here for change. Um, I can give some other examples of how development kind of creates these dependencies if we have time for that. Or would you?
It over to Catherine, and then we'll come back. And that's really fascinating. And so I'll pass it over to you, Catherine.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I want to make sure we have time for those examples. That sounds really cool. I do think this is a moment of real change. We don't yet know what it means because we're in the middle of it. And for any situation, I think being in the middle of it is the hardest. We can't know, and that uncertainty is, I think, eating away at a lot of the resilience that people have. So we have members of the community from the global south, from the global north, who have lost their jobs, who are struggling with kind of what this means, and both for their communities, but also for themselves. And I think that's really hard. And I absolutely agree. I started my career doing some international development, and there were a lot of people who cared about it and pointed out like there are some deep issues, and how are we going to fix them? And so I try to be an optimist. So I would really like to echo that my hope is that we really can use this moment to leverage this as an opportunity for some really deep systemic change. There's been a lot of interest. So I also work on climate change, and so a lot of interest, right, in a lot more of locally led adaptation as a key frame. And we've have a lot of women in the community who work on community engagement in their different projects, whether it's water resources or WASH. And I would love to see that become more of the heart of these kinds of projects. We have a lot of members who across Africa are saying, we've got local solutions. Let's build this. Let's make this an entrepreneurship. Let's come up with bankable solutions that like we're the ones solving our own problems. And I really believe that is, I've worked with entrepreneurs from across the world in a previous job, and they knew what they needed. They knew what the problems were, and they live it. They know the answers. We need to find ways to help those communities build the solutions that they need. And so, yeah, I am trying to be hopeful. I think that that this could be good, but uncertainty is really stressful, whether it's these kind of political situations, whether it's climate change, whether it's something that you're personally going through. Any kind of uncertainty is really stressful, and I think that this is when it's really important to have networks and communities to support each other, to brainstorm about ideas, to work together, and to build that better future. And I'll pass it back. I'll come back. Let it go back to you, Andrea.
It's so important, and I do agree from the innovation research that I've done is that the people closest to the problem do know the solution, right? And Indra, actually, maybe you can speak to that a little bit in terms of what are some of the pivots that you're seeing, or the ways that the examples of people doing things differently under these new constraints.
Well, the sort of examples that I was talking about earlier are more speaking to how the development of the old ways don't really work, and we have it, we're seeing that in the field with fail. So I've worked in rural regions in India, looking at these development programs, and it's when they fail, when there's a 5-year plan for a project, for a watershed project, for example, and it fails, there's no sadness for, oh my gosh, something failed that we spent so much money on. It's just, all right, let's move on to the next. And this is not something that's coming straight from policy, but it's also something that is getting more accepted among the rural communities that are targets of these programs. That, okay, this organization failed, this program failed, there'll be something else along, and we'll get more benefits or money or whatever from the following project. So this cycle has been perpetuated for so many years that it's just being seen as, okay, this is what the reality is. This is what the normal route for development is. One of the ways in which I've seen this happen with gender is, again, speaking to gender mainstreaming, where an NGO that I worked with in the early 2010s, gender talk was something that they employed across their development programs, that we need women's inclusions, we need women's participation. And I saw this sort of gender talk being repeated by community members themselves. These are tribal communities that I'm talking about. And if I spoke to the men about, well, why do you think your wives and your mothers are being asked to go and attend these development meetings in nearby towns or villages, etc.? And they would all say, because it's good. It's good for women to participate. It's good for women to attend. But this would just be a very superficial sort of, this is how it should be. Very rarely was there any articulation of anything deeper than, oh, they should go and attend. There was no articulation on, this will be good for education, this will be good for the future of the community, this will be good for women themselves to be able to gain some sort of equity in the world. These sorts of thoughts were not well articulated, and I'm not going to say that they were not thought of, but certainly if you see normal practices among communities of women, of girls getting married at the age of 15 or 16, and then stopping their education and then staying home to bring up their children, take care of their homes, etc. If you look at the practices, the continuing practices, then there is a disconnect between community members saying, well, they should be participating in development, and the outcome of this participation. And that is when gender mainstreaming, which should have been a political call to action for women's empowerment, just becomes virtue signaling, you can say, maybe.
I think it's a really important point. Something that's well intended can indeed become virtue signaling. And I think from both of your perspectives, what I'm hearing you say is that we need to keep doing the right things, but to be open to doing them differently in these times. And so I'd like to ask you a little bit more about your own work. And with all of these changes, how has your own work had to adapt? What are you doing differently to keep pushing for equity and impact in a more constrained and uncertain environment? And we'll start with Catherine first this time.
Okay. Thanks, Andrea. So it's interesting, right? So in some ways, I feel like we're not actually doing anything differently as the community of women in water, and some of that is because our purpose, like one of the reasons that we started, was to support other women. So we are continuing to support the women in the network and to really try to build connections and help them. And we have changed some of the topics that we're doing for some of our internal things. We're still doing our public work to raise the profile of water resources and water systems and their importance and the importance of gender equality in the workforce for that sector, our sector, but also in the need for gender equality for everyone's access as well, right? So in some ways, none of that has changed. And I think the other thing I would say is that, we have been a network. We've only become a charity very recently. And so from a fundraising perspective, fundraising is new to us, obviously, as a range of different challenges have come, not just in international development, but a lot of global challenges, conflicts, all there are gaps now in a lot of places that there hadn't been before. And so then you've got everyone kind of pressing any sort of remaining funding to fulfill all of those, right? So there is a real challenge there. I don't want to downplay that there has been a shift in the funding, but just to say that we're nascent and working on it. And then I think the third point I want to make is I'd love to hear from both of you about your experiences, but I have always ended up having some conversations, regardless of what's happening politically, with people who I'm glad to say were comfortable asking me some deep questions, right? Like, do we really need a community for women? Like, you're not going to invite any men to that? Is that really fair? Is that the right thing to do? And having some really challenging conversations and sort of trying to unpick why is that question being asked? Where is this person coming from? What are they concerned about? Is this a fear of missing out? If they're not invited to this event, is this a lack of understanding, like the system works for them, and so they think it might be more merit-based than it is? And where do we have this conversation and where does it come through? So I'm finding that in some ways, people are feeling a bit more comfortable asking those questions. And so the opportunity to have a really rich and deep conversation, but not just one conversation, because it never ends at one point, right? Like to have a deep chat with that, it's a long process. It's not a single presentation. And I find those hard, but I find them really good, good conversations to have. So yeah, I'd love to hear from both of you if you're finding that even those one-to-one conversations are drastically changing or if they're roughly the same. I don't know if I pass over to Andrasky or back to you, Andrea. Sorry, I'm not sure where to go.
Well, I think I just wanted to say, I think one of the things about the Women Plus Water community that has been really important is that it's been intersectional from the start. We've always welcomed men and people of all gender identities and all backgrounds from around the world. And I think one of the reasons we've been really intentional about doing that is to ensure that, like Indrachi mentioned in her examples, that we can get below the surface and have everyone understand what the journey is that we're trying to go up on. And we didn't want the journey and the experiences of women to be separate. We wanted them to be centered, though. And so that's why, we have women plus water, but the plus is really significant. It's spelled out in a bit more detail on the website, but that idea that, we have to move together and understand that really deeply in terms of how we're moving this work collectively is really important. And I think, at the University of Calgary, where I'm located now in the Office of Institutional Commitments, one of the things that we've done is taken a very innovative approach. And I think we're the first university in Canada to amalgamate the offices of equity, diversity and inclusion, sustainability, and mental health and well-being. And this became an opportunity to really look at where's the overlap amongst these areas, which there is many commonalities, and to really think about how do we reduce duplication and think more strategically about how we can advance these priorities together rather than separately. And so that's been one way that we've adapted to current changing financial circumstances, not only globally but locally, and also the need in the world to be critical of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and really focusing on the impacts that we want to see not only on our own campus but in the world. And so I'll pass it over to you, Indrakshi, to learn more about how this is showing up in your work.
So just to answer, Catherine, you have a supporter in me. I think a community of women in water is incredibly important, and I would not be someone asking you, why do we have that community? So I don't think you're going to get that question from me. But I do echo as well what Catherine said, that for me, for my work, not a lot has changed. Maybe I could just say that um, the naivety that comes with being a young researcher, thinking that states or policies are going to actually work for people and women's development, that has kind of disappeared. And so the current work that I'm doing is purely looking at climate change specifically from a grassroots perspective. And here I'd like to kind of showcase this organization that I'm working with that's been a huge part of this a recent project that I've started. If maybe Viviana could share the slide that the PDF. So my the way in which that I came across this organization, the Initiatives for New Ecological Community Concerns, or in short, INEC. It's a very funny story. I was attending COP28 that was hosted by in Dubai in 2023, and sort of just kind of walking around a little bit disillusioned with the whole thing because I'd never attended a COP meeting before. And I had heard from other anthropology colleagues and people who worked in the same field that these used to be these very engaging meetings where the public were allowed to observe negotiations. They were allowed to heckle world leaders and, call them out on, well, why aren't you focusing on this? Why aren't you focusing on that? It used to be such a sort of inclusive event. And in the past couple of years or so, it's become very, very closed off, where negotiations happen behind closed doors. Civil body organizations are sidelined. They're not allowed to attend negotiations. And so I was kind of walking around trying to find my place in all of this. When I came across this kiosk that was displaying that was by INEC. Yeah, just this slide is fine, Viviana. Thank you. So, and I met this wonderful man, Myron Mendes, who was representing INAC, and he explained the organization to me. So, what they do is that they connect organizations and individuals from across India who are working on traditional knowledge, on rural knowledge, adaptation knowledge to combat climate change, and they're connecting these ideas they're integrating these ideas, connecting individuals and organizations in order to help rural communities combat climate change in a very real way. And what I found the most promising was that they foreground ethics in climate change in all of the work that they do, that they realize the responsibility for climate change is deep, it is ethical, it is moral. So sort of the normative rights and equity issues that I referred to earlier in my introduction. So I started speaking with more members of this organization, and as I found out more about this organization and what they do, I conceived of this new project that I'm working on currently, where I'm exploring three things. Firstly, how narratives of climate change that are coming from the Indian state specifically are incorporating or not incorporating, as I'm increasingly finding, voices from tribal communities. Now, just a side note here, in India, we cannot call them indigenous communities for legal reasons. So we term tribal communities as tribes, or their own word, their own empowered word for a tribal community, which is Adivasi. So I'm looking at how Adivasi communities and their voices are integrated into India's state plans for climate change. I'm recognizing in my project that successful climate action cannot rely on top-down directives anymore. I don't know if they ever did. So I'm looking at how non-governmental organizations, community body organizations, civilian organizations are scaling up rural, traditional, and tribal knowledge to combat climate change, share this information amongst one another across the very, very large country of India. And most importantly to me, this question that has come up again and again for me in the number of conferences that I've attended, talks that I've attended related to climate change, is how tribal communities themselves, the individuals within these communities, understand the concept of climate change, because the discourse of climate change is very transnational. It is very top down. It it's something that many of our ancient communities have dealt with before. This is not the first time that climate change is happening. Yes, the scale of it is different, the mode of it is different, but communities have dealt with changes in climate before. They have the knowledge to deal with these changes. Uh, how are they understanding, or how do they perceive these very, very top-down narratives of climate change that they are now receiving from the state government or the national government of India? So this is something that I have recently started exploring, and it very much comes from recognizing that it's the smaller communities that are going to make the difference when it comes to climate change.
I think it's so important to recognize that the top down versus community level interactions are very different, and where they can have a significant impact. And I think one of the things that's really important in this conversation that we've touched upon, but is that in these uncertain times, community support becomes even more important. And what role, very directly for you, Catherine, but also for you and Rachi, role do networks and communities play in supporting women working in the water sector? And maybe you could speak a little bit about how you've personally experienced a moment in a community where community support helped you overcome an obstacle or a barrier. Maybe I'll start with you, Rachi, and then Catherine.
Um, we need more women working in the development sector, if I speak about rural India and my experience in rural India. Beyond just in WASH programs, community is so important when you are delivering some sort of development benefit to women. And having more women do this that makes the delivery so much more seamless and accepted by the beneficiaries of development. So just I'm going to draw from my field experience and my experience with this lovely woman that I worked with. She was the only female worker in this NGO that I was collaborating with in the early 2010s. The only female NGO worker who was responsible for all of the sort of women's programs, like managing self-help groups, managing microfinance, while multiple men took care of things like agriculture and watershed planning. And this was a rather unfair division of labor, because she was solely in charge of handling all of the women beneficiaries and these women's programs, whereas the responsibility for two other programs was divided between multiple men. So it often fell to her to not only manage her own workload, but also to sensitize male staff to the needs of the women beneficiaries that they themselves were dealing with, whether it comes to agriculture or in watershed planning. So she had this added burden of, well, I've got to educate my male staff on how to deal with women beneficiaries, as well as take care of my own work. And by her own admission, personally, she said that she had to be, and this is something that even I have realized working in rural India, that women have to be extra careful about how they dress, what their mannerisms are, not displaying too much camaraderie and familiarity with male colleagues, but also just enough so that you are considered a good team player, a good collaborator within your workplace. So I was very close with this woman, and I used to, when I was living there, living in the town for field work, we would often share meals. I would often go over to her home to spend the night, because her husband was in the same sector as her. He was also working in development, although in a different NGO, and he was away a lot for work, something that she could never do because she was a woman. So even though her work called for her to be away on overnight trips, it was much she was not allowed to do much of this sort of work that the male staff could do. So when her husband was away, I would go over and we would spend time together, we would chat, etc. Community support, because I was the other female in that town who kind of recognized the kind of work that she was doing. And then there was a familiarity there because of where we were and how we were working. There was a lot of gossip in the town about why. And so because sometimes I would contribute to the running of her household by buying groceries, for thanking her for feeding me. And so there would be gossip in the town about why is this other woman who's come from some very different place than us, buying groceries for your household. And she was brave enough and informed enough to not give in to that kind of chatter. But I do know that her life was difficult, being the only female worker. Had she had a community of other women working in the NGO doing what she does, she perhaps would have had a much more comfortable time working in that NGO, working and doing something that she really liked and enjoyed doing. So community is so important for women working in the development sector, whether you're dealing with WASH activities or whether you're dealing with other sorts of development activities. And I strongly feel that women specifically in rural India, should not be doing just the feminized development work related to water, sanitation, hygiene. They should be also in charge of agriculture, technical planning, and resource management projects. Because at the end of the day, if you are going to be mainstreaming gender across development programs, you need women there. You need women there to reach out to women beneficiaries.
So important what you've mentioned, and that community can be, formal and informal, right? And that it doesn't have to be in a formal network setting. And I would pass it over to you, Catherine, for the last word here, because I know we're sort of at time. But the last word on, how has community support, what you see formally through the community of women in water, how does that support women in their careers in the water sector?
So yeah, I wish I had more time because I could spend an hour on this, but I will quickly say, I showed some testimonial quotes earlier. We know that there are questions that you have about your career, or about, steps that you want to take that you might just need to talk to another woman about, right? Like, oh, we're thinking about expanding our family and I'm thinking about making this change. What does that mean? We're talking about moving from here to here. You've lived there, you've worked with this company, you've done this, like this is what I'm thinking. What is the reality? What is this organization really like for working women, for working mothers, I'm mid-career and I need to make a change because my parents are aging. Like wherever you are in your path, whatever the challenges are, right? There are just some really intimate conversations that you might need to get that support for your career and what you need to do. And I think that's really important. And it's something that I see like at the end of whether we're talking about technical issues during one of our events or whether we are having more of a professional development chat. One of the things that's really interesting is we will inevitably have 8 or 9 countries on the call, and or women from living in 8 or 9 different countries, and they will all say, "Oh, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the only one dealing with this." And now I find out like all of these utilities in all 9 countries, we're all struggling with this, or we're all struggling with this water resource issue, or we're all struggling with this challenge in different ways because we're in different contexts. But actually, the core support that I'm feeling is really big. I feel really supported right now. I feel like I have this, and we have many engineers and women in other fields, and they're the only woman on their team at work. And so having the community of women in water is really important for them because they need to have, as you were saying, Andrashki, a certain persona at work. And sometimes you can't not know the answer. You have to go, oh, yes, well, I'll send you a report on that later that I've recently read, and you go and you find like this research in your free time. But to have a place where you can come in and say, I don't know the answer. I don't know what to do about this. I'm not sure. That is such a luxury for a lot of women in the sector, and we need those spaces. I will also say both, I guess, more professional networks, right? But also for me personally, we're also a part of broader coalitions that can do more than we can do, right? So one of the reasons I started the community is there were already amazing NGOs that were trying to support women and girls' access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. There were already networks that were working on other things. And I thought, well, there's not, at the time, there wasn't a network connecting other women across disciplines related to water and globally. Let's do that and then build. I'd love to, there are other groups that are doing things on allies. And so we're part of the World Bank's Equal Aqua platform, which has done a lot to pull data and be able to tell a data-driven story about inequalities in the sector for the workforce and the fact that globally women are only 20% of the workforce in the water sector. We're part of the Stronger Together Coalition, which brings together allied organizations, but also 8 women's networks from around the world that are networks like the community, focusing on different regions or different parts of water and bringing our voices together to really have a platform to advance gender equality on a policy level, on an international level, on a regional level. And those are all really important. And so I think that's how networks and communities can support both individually and also at a networks level. And I will just really quickly share, because I'm trying to keep an eye on time, that for me, some of the women I've met through the community have just been really impactful at different points, whether that was being a working mom or trying to decide what my next step was. And the chats that I had with them were really empowering. So thanks, Andrea.
It's important to have that space where you can be authentic and not have to worry about what others may think of you. And I just want to remind any of the participants, if you have a question for us, please put it into the Q&A. We would be more than happy to answer it. And while folks are thinking of questions, I would like to ask one more. And what I wanted to finish up here on before we answer any Q&A questions is, women make up roughly 20% of the global water workforce. What needs to happen to move from simple representation to real inclusion and leadership? I know that's a big question, but I'll ask you, Indrakshi, for your thoughts, and then Catherine.
I'm going to say political transformation. We really need some sort of systemic, long transformational changes happening across societies have women take on more leadership roles. I'm wondering about the statistic though. Was it always 25%, or is this something that, because usually you see that a lot of the achievements that we've made with regards to women's roles in leadership, they went backwards post-COVID. And so I'm wondering, has it always been that low, 25%? I'm kind of shocked with that number.
20%.
20%. 20%.
20, not 25.
Yeah,
Okay,
20. Yeah.
It needs to be there needs to be political transformation for women to get more involved in water sectors. There needs to be more incentives as well. It's not the most attractive of career paths for women. There's this perception that it is a feminized job. So, I mean, I think Catherine would have more input with the regards to what needs to happen. She's more in that space than I am.
The last word to you.
Okay, I thought Indrashki actually nailed this question in her intro when you talked about the hollowing out of the gender equality work. I think that is fundamentally the thing that has to change. And I would say that it's behavioral change, right? It's a change in a belief system, because I would say that right now, people as a collective do not believe that advancing gender equality is going to make it better for everyone. And if they don't believe that and they don't act on that belief, that's it. So what do we need? We just need massive global behavioral change to get everyone to realize that diversity is a benefit for everyone. And I think that, I wish that behavioral change was not one of the hardest things to do. But it is something, and I think it's important to reference that there's been a lot of research around this. Groups, even like McKinsey going, it is diversity in teams and not just one person, right? There is a minimum area of diversity that you need. You need a group, you need an organizational um, framework and mindset that we want a little bit of conflict. We want different ideas, and that is where the innovation comes in. And for-profit companies, it makes them more profitable. It makes more sustainable solutions. I mean, research shows that women and men hold different values. They hold different values connected to water. Um, and that therefore, when you have women and men both being part of that workforce, they're going to come with different ideas. There's also lots of research about when women are in charge of management of water resources and other environmental aspects, that you end up with more holistic and more sustainable groups. So there are lots and lots of reasons of why it's really important for the sector to move beyond this 20% number that we have actually been at for quite a while. I feel like sometimes I hear, oh, it was 17.8 and now we're at 20.1. But they're just we've never made it to a quarter. And that's, it's 20%ish in the UK. It's 20%ish globally. That is pretty much the standard number, sadly, just to answer your question, Drosky.
Do we have time for me to ask another question to ask Catherine about this? When you talk about this number, I'm again a little bit shocked that it's 20%, quite honestly. Do you think there's a relation between these sorts of roles being, when I talked about these roles being feminized, what I meant was how feminized work usually gets devalued. There's lower pay. You see men migrating away from those kinds of works, and then women going towards it, and then it suddenly has lower pay, suddenly gets more devalued. This happened with nursing work at the end of the Cold War or during the Cold War. I can't remember, in Eastern Europe, where anyway, that's digressing. But do you think the feminizing of water-related work has something to do with the sort of people that have those jobs?
That's a great question. I'm not going to pretend to know the answer. What I can tell you is that the World Bank's Equal Aqua platform that has the most data that I know of on this, which looks just at utilities, which are probably, I would say, less that's not where you expect most of the women to be, right? Like we see a lot of women doing wash and geo work. Like I definitely see more women at NGO events around water sanitation and hygiene, particularly on the comms teams, advocacy teams, right? Maybe than I do when I'm at a water tech conference, for example, right? So some of it is where are you and where are these numbers? And you are right that when it comes to like comms teams and NGOs, we do see more women in those. But I don't, I think that one of the challenges is for the sector as a whole, we don't have a lot of women. We know that women diplomats are, it's something like between 1995 and 2002, and I'm going to get those numbers wrong. The Council on Foreign Relations looked at it, and it was something like 8% of mediators and 2% of negotiators were women, right? So even in jobs that you would think, oh, well, that's not a science background, right? There is some research that sort of shows that the more cachet the job has, the less likely it is that women will be doing it. And so I think you're right that there is a correlation. There are lots and lots of women doing unpaid work on water for the households, for the communities, for the families. But there's some interesting research on this in Africa for water user associations and how with those, all of the low paid jobs are women, all of the unpaid jobs are women. But as soon as it comes to being a chairperson, as soon as it comes to being on a board, as soon as it comes with a title, they're all men. So I don't want to paint the picture that that is all of Africa or all of anywhere in the world, but I'm just trying to highlight that you're right, there is absolutely a trend. Um, that is really worth exploring. And it's something that yeah, I'm really curious about. So I hope that helps answer your question.
No, absolutely. That explains this number to me. That definitely does. Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Catherine and Drakshay. I'll hand this back over to Stacey for the closing words.
Thank you so much. It was a fabulous conversation, you all. Thank you for all of the insights of sharing your experiences, your knowledge. It was a very valuable conversation today. So I want to thank you all for that, and we really appreciate your time and your willingness to share this with us and our community today. And of course, thanks to everybody who attended today's event. We really, as a community, grow and are impactful because of you. So, Women Plus Water, just to remind you, we offer up a lot of different opportunities like the conversations that we hosted today. We have a Women Plus Water expert list where you can go and find experts, or you can become an expert. Nominations are they're self-nominations, so please consider joining the list, and it provides a resource for other people to diversify their panels or media experts that they want to reach out to, etc. And then, of course, we have mentorship opportunities also available through here. So if you guys want to host a mentorship event, please feel free to visit our website and learn more about that. We will be hosting our next conversation in April on the 23rd, and it's going to be a focus on water and disasters. So please make sure, I think there'll be a link in the chat. So if you guys want to join us next month, please do that. And before we leave for this portion of the event, I want to thank, of course, Corin Schuster Wallace, Viviana Barrero Nino, Tara Hackle, Jesse Widow for all of the work that's put in behind the scenes to make this initiative such a success, and to Val and Winnie from In Other Words Incorporated for interpreting this event live into French. And of course, lastly, thanks to our sponsors, the Global Institute for Water Security and the College of Arts and Science here at the University of Saskatchewan. So at this time, we invite anybody who's on here that is a student or early career individual, if they'd like to stick around and chat with our guests yourself or ask them any other questions that you may have. So thank you all very much, and we'll end the recording here.